Hi everyone, it's Kelly from the Hub here today with Angela from CAP. She runs the Domestic Violence and Outreach Program. How are you there, dear?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. So today we are talking about lethality. And hold on, that is like lethal lethality. When I first heard that word, I think a while ago, I was like legality. Well, we'll talk about that as well. But this is one of those things that is domestic violence has real physical consequences and can sometimes end in death and severe injury. So we're going to talk about like why, it, and we've talked about this already, that the victim makes excuses for the perpetrator a lot. It's okay, it's not going to happen again. It was just this one time, and all those kinds of excuses things. And sometimes this it's not going to happen again, or it was just one time, could result in something that's very dangerous. So
Right.
this is a very interesting topic to learn about. I think those of us who watch it on TV have a way that we see it, which may or may not be true. So I'm very excited to hear what you say to see if all those things are portrayed accurately. So what
Mhm.
is the sort of lethality of domestic violence?
Yeah. So, we all rationalize our behavior, other people's behavior. Like, I didn't want to get up and go for a walk this morning, so I rationalized it, saying I didn't have enough sleep and I need the extra hour to sleep, right? So we rationalize things it's a psychological protection mechanism, right? And so we have learned from victims that that is often a part of the process of them trying to somehow preserve the relationship, or not necessarily believe that the abuse is happening. Um, so lethality is it's an important topic because we can prevent it, and there's research that tells us that.
Hmm.
And that's what I want to get across to the viewers today, is that this is preventable. We know that 1 in 3 women in their lifetime will experience domestic violence, sexual assault, and even homicide as a result of an intimate partner relationship.
It's really 1 in 3.
Yeah. Um, and and the numbers for men are somewhere around like 1 in 7, 1 in 9. So we do know that it happens to men, and we as an agency acknowledge that it happens in heterosexual and homosexual relationships all of the time. Um, but it's still primarily a women's health issue, and that's where I think that I don't want to get lost in that part of it, that it is still a women's health issue. So one of the in Pennsylvania, there's a couple of things happening. The Pennsylvania Coalition Against Domestic Violence has been collecting homicide research in Pennsylvania, um, information about homicides that had a domestic violence root to it. I want to say for 15 to 20 years now.
Oh wow.
And they put out an annual report. So you can actually go to their website,
Huh.
Pennsylvania Coalition Against Domestic Violence, and you can see the annual homicide report. And I know I have some of this information because in Pennsylvania, we also have a lethality assessment project. So lethality assessment is based in research that's been done by Dr. Jacqueline Campbell um, at Johns Hopkins University in Maryland. So our friends to just south of us, right? And she was doing this research over decades. Basically, what she did was when they did a death review, which is sometimes what happens in like child deaths. They bring everybody together to try and figure out, what happened, what were the points of contact. It's a way to improve systems and how we collaborate together.
Yeah.
Um,
Okay.
yeah, so it's a similar concept. She was looking at the points of contact for the victim, points of contact for the offender, what were the dynamics in the relationship, what were the types of abuse that were present in the relationship. It I find it to be really kind of fascinating. I'm a little bit of a research geek sometimes when it comes to stuff like this.
Yeah.
Um, so Pennsylvania's been collecting the homicide information, and you can even look county by county. If you go to their website, you can, they put out the report that sometimes includes like some of the personal accounts of what happened. Um, it's also interesting to note that there's always a significant number of people who were not involved in the relationship. So I think there was one in York County a couple of years ago where a woman was leaving and moving out of the residence, and the perpetrator, the offender, came back and killed her and the friend who was helping her. So sometimes situations like that where a new partner, the perpetrator, the offender, the abuser will kill the victim and also his new partner. So sometimes they also bring the children into it, and that is also incredibly sad. But there are also usually children involved in the homicide report as well. So it's important to, like you and I were talking, I'm not sure what pushes somebody to that point, but when it happens, it's not always just the victim and the offender who are being killed. When you look, and also when you look at like mass gun shootings that unfortunately are kind of prevalent here, there is usually, if you look into that perpetrator's history, there's usually a history of domestic violence. They can see a correlation between those mass shootings and domestic violence.
So if it was like a younger person, one of their parents could have been abused, or they could have been abused in that sort of in that relationship, like in that family.
No, for the mass shootings, you mean?
Yeah.
No, usually they are an offender. They have a history of being.
Oh, they're an offender.
Yes, they're usually an abuser.
Oh, okay.
When you look into their histories, they usually have a reported history of being a domestic violence abuser.
Oh, that's interesting. Wow.
I think there's a lot that could change in our society if we really got serious about domestic violence. So I'll share some of the research with you, and then maybe you can make some of your own conclusions.
Yeah.
So like I said, PCADV collected information, and I have a stat here, between 2005 and 2016, so that's an 11-year period, 1,815 women, men, and children were killed died as a result of domestic violence homicide. Don't say that to me. So the research, I talked about the lethality assessment research. So Jackie Campbell did this research. Maryland then brought together a group of allied professionals, both in the criminal justice system and human service agencies, the courts, all of that, to prevent domestic violence homicides. And because they learned that some of these things are preventable. And so they call it the Lethality Assessment Project or Lethality Assessment Program. And it's a partnership. It's designed to be a partnership between law enforcement and victim advocates like me, people who work in domestic violence community-based agencies like me. Because they're one of the statistics that they found, and this really shocked me. I learned this information back in like 2010, 2011. And the one statistic that really, really just continues to stay with me is that only 4% of abused victims had used a domestic violence hotline or shelter within the year prior to being killed by their intimate partner.
4%.
So that means 96% of the people who were killed did not avail themselves of the free and confidential services that we provide. Or they could at least not find that connection in the research.
I mean, that makes me want to ask all the questions, right?
Okay.
I mean,
Yeah.
I think every logical person who's watching right now is like, well, why didn't they?
hmm That's the question I asked. Why not?
Right.
Everybody knows where the shelter is, and in my mind, everybody does.
Yeah.
And everybody knows that we're there in my mind. But this is also the world that I walk in and have for over 20 years. So for me, it's like, well, of course everybody knows. Maybe they don't. I don't like
Well,
I don't know.
I mean,
I
like,
just was flabbergasted by that statistic.
I mean, I think that for a lot of people, accessing any social services, whether it's going to the food pantry or asking for help or getting WIC dollars or getting domestic, asking for like domestic violence help, that brings shame.
Mm-hmm.
And the
Absolutely.
last thing anybody wants to feel is shame, because it makes you feel horrible top to bottom. And so if you don't ask, you won't feel the shame, then you'll be fine.
Right.
Right? We talk about rationalization for
Right.
making those decisions. I mean, so I think that's about like, and that's what you guys do. Not to say that you normalize domestic violence, but you say, this is out there. We are out there. If you want help, this is how you do it. And it's not like, and I also think that people they believe that even though someone says, no, we're friendly, it'll be fine. I think people think that when they call up or come over, that someone's going to go, well, why didn't you leave? Or,
Yeah.
that someone's going to be sassy, and then the shame starts all over again for them.
Yeah. It's a really good point.
I mean, I don't know. I know that that's one of the reasons why people don't access some of the other hub services that we have, because they don't want to feel that feeling. Who knows? There could be also 97 other reasons why people don't do that. But to know that 96% of the people didn't access services that's mind-blowing.
Yeah.
Wow.
Some of the other statistics, so more than 44% of the perpetrators were arrested in the year prior to the homicide. So that also tells us that they're known to the system, that they have criminal histories. So this behavior goes outside of the relationship, right? And that there is law enforcement or criminal justice system involvement as part of who they are.
Right, they're like acting out in some way that's enough to get them arrested. And you know what? What's interesting is that it doesn't matter what they got arrested for. They did something too much to cause someone to call the police on them.
Right.
That's interesting.
So we also know that there's a connection to law enforcement. Like the victim is probably involved somehow, whether it's on the periphery as, trying to bail them out of jail, or, having some contact with their probation officer, so there is some periphery contact there. And that's part of why this protocol, the program has been set up to be a relationship between law enforcement and advocates. The other incident that completely dispels the whole, violence escalates reality that when I learned, that 22 years ago when I started in this field, that's what we were talking about, the violence escalates, right?
Right.
And I still do believe that on some level. Like I do believe that, they're not going to haul off and hit somebody on the first date.
Right.
I think 99% of us would walk away from that if that happened.
Yeah.
So there is still some of that escalation. But in 28 to 33% of the victims, so that's about a third of the victims, the first incident of violence is the homicide.
Whew. Wow. I never would have thought that. I would have thought that would have been 10%, 5%.
Right.
a third, a clear third-ish,
Mm-hmm.
the first incidence of violence is the homicide.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. So that person hasn't been to the ER, they haven't been to their regular doc, or
Right.
no one's noticed it, because it's not even that. It's not even that they went to seek medical treatment. A colleague or a relative didn't notice a bruise or a whatever. Wow.
Right. So
Wow.
that, that changes. I mean, we still know that still leaves 2/3 of those cases where physical violence was escalating, and
True.
we can still talk about that.
True.
But I did find that statistic was quite stark, because there was never any other sign. So when you look at the lethality indicators, that also helps to bear it out. So the lethality indicators, there's a questionnaire. And let me tell you, in Pennsylvania, I want to say that most of our counties are on board now. We started in Pennsylvania with the pilot project in 2011, and we had, or was it 2012? It could have been 2012. It was 2012. We had 11 counties who were pilot sites. I was working in Adams County at the time, and we happened to be one of the pilot sites. And I have gone on then to help train the program to other communities and counties. So really what it is there's a questionnaire that law enforcement can introduce to victims when they're at the scene, or in a follow-up conversation, and they ask them these 11 questions. And then there's a scoring system,
Yeah.
that kind of indicates if they screen in, and to encourage them to make the call. And it's a sobering conversation. It pretty much goes like this, like, I have a series of questions to ask you, because I believe that some of the things I'm learning or hearing about your relationship could put you at higher risk for being killed by your partner. And I want to review these questions with you to help learn more about your situation, because I'm afraid that that this is going to escalate, and that you're at risk of being killed by your partner.
Wow. Right. That's a moment.
Right. We're not.
Right. We're not. Right. We're not fiddling around about this.
Right.
This is serious. And then they go through. Do you have any of those questions?
I do. Yeah.
Can you read? I mean, you don't have to read through all of them, but can you read through some of them? I think it'd be interesting to just know, what do they say? What do they ask?
Yeah. So, so has he or she ever used a weapon against you or threatened you with a weapon? If they answer yes to that, that's an automatic screening, because we know that the presence of weapons in a relationship is the biggest red flag waving in the breeze that you will see. Has he or she ever threatened to kill you or your children? That's another red flag. If they say yes, we're connecting them to an advocate. And then the third one, do you think he or she might try to kill you? So threats we take them seriously, right? So those are questions that if you answer yes to only one of those,
right,
that's an automatic screen, and that's a high danger situation.
Right.
Threats to kill, having the weapons present to do so, that's part of the reason. And one of the reasons why, let me tell you so research shows that an abused woman whose partner threatens her with a gun or weapon is 20 times more likely to be subsequently murdered than other women. Mm-hmm. So if her partner has threatened to use a gun or another weapon, the risk of her being killed by that person is 20 times higher. I know this is a real kind of Debbie Downer.
No, there's just so many things that I want to talk about. There's
and another statistic. So this one I think is interesting, because they asked the perpetrator a question, the offender.
Good.
When a gun is present in the household, an abused woman is 6 times more likely to be killed. Perpetrators who shot and killed intimate partners were asked whether they would have used another weapon if a gun were not available. Most said no.
That was the question that I was going to ask. I was going to talk about, what if there isn't a gun in the house? Would they choose something else? Right, because, are they picking up a hammer? I mean, I don't want to walk down that path very far, right. but Are they? And that's interesting. They say no. And so that was the big question I had in my brain was, if there's a gun in the house, it can be used.
Yes. And this is not to get into any kind of political debate.
Right. This has nothing to do with that. Right.
Right. I grew up in a household. My dad was a hunter. There were weapons in the house. We're not trying to play that game.
Right.
But what we are saying is that there's
a correlation. Right. There's a link. There's absolutely a link. Yeah.
Let me.
Wow.
So some of the other questions. Has he or she ever tried to choke you? So let's talk about language, because we talked about that back in the first session, remember?
Yep.
So most people will say choke when they actually mean strangulation, right? Strangulation is what happens when somebody exerts that pressure from the outside and closes off your airway. Choking is like choking on a grape. Choking is when it gets inside.
Right.
Choke on a piece of fruit or, something like that.
Right. Strangulation is from the outside. Right. Yeah. Choking's from the inside. Yes.
But most people don't think about the word strangulation. If I said to you, did he strangle you? Or did he choke you?
He choked me. He didn't strangle me. Right. Right. People, I never thought about it that way.
So.
Right. He choked you. He choked you. Yeah. He didn't. He technically strangled you. Right.
So Pennsylvania, actually, in the last, I want to say 2 years, I think it was 2018, actually passed a strangulation law to make it an automatic felony, because strangulation has a high correlation to death. And they may not do it the first time, which is why they ask the question, have they ever choked you? Because oftentimes they might do it enough just to slow down the victim, or they might do it enough that the victim loses consciousness, but then comes back. So sometimes they kind of play games with it, I think, maybe to show them or to tell them, I've got your life in my hands. I can take it anytime I want. And that then creates that mental fear also, right?
Right. That means that death could happen at any time and you have no control over that.
Right.
Right.
So it's an automatic felony, and they can prosecute that strangulation charge specifically. And so in Lancaster County, we have a protocol that's been added. So there's these protocols for law enforcement when they respond to a domestic violence or sexual assault scene. There are protocols in how they're supposed to handle it, so that all law enforcement is responding in the same similar fashion. And they're collecting the same evidence and that sort of thing, because in that way the prosecutors can have what they need to prosecute, right?
Right.
So we have a strangulation protocol that's been added to our domestic violence protocol. We have in 2016, Lancaster County came on as one of the LAP counties, the LAP counties. And so we've been training law enforcement to use this protocol since then under the leadership of the district attorney's office. We actually have a specialized unit at the DA's office that handles that. There's a team of prosecutors and advocates who focus specifically on domestic violence, sexual assault, and family violence cases. So some of the other questions. Is he or she violently or constantly jealous, or does he or she control most of your daily activities? Have you left him or her or separated after living together or being married? So I think we might have talked about leaving is a very dangerous time.
Yeah.
In fact, a lot would say the most dangerous time.
Right.
Has he or she ever tried to kill himself or herself?
How is that an indicator?
Well, if they don't have any regard for their own life, they probably don't have any regard for the lives of the people around them.
Or they could do that whole, they could use that as a manipulation.
Yes.
You don't So see, you don't love me enough, so I'll
Right.
just kill myself as a way to make that the victim behave differently.
Right.
Okay, okay, all right.
Do they follow or spy on you and leave threatening messages? That goes to the stalking aspect, and
Yep.
there's some more stats here. Um, Here's the one that you and I were talking about a little bit. Do you have children that he knows is not his or hers? So that creates, sometimes just having to communicate with another partner creates a problem. But that also is a continual reminder that you were once with somebody else, and maybe that you still they use that. Do you still have feelings for them? You still care more about them?
So you have children with them and not with me, or whatever all those words are that they're using to
Yes.
like manipulate.
So a national study found when an intimate partner is violently or constantly jealous, homicide is 9 times more likely. When the partner controls the victim's daily activities, homicide is 5 times more likely.
And I mean, I can see that there are people who are, I mean, I can hear people who are like watching this going, well, this person does that, check. This person does that, check. This person does that, check. And I can see them adding up. Well, if they're 9 times more likely and then they're 5 times more likely, I mean, that's, as you go through that list, it becomes more and more daunting.
Yes. And so that's why it's important for people to reach out to us. We are there to help people safety plan. We trust that you know your situation best.
Yeah.
And that we will not ever tell you that you have to leave a relationship. We are
Right.
not those people.
Right.
And we will not make it conditional that you leave them, because we know how dangerous that can be. We are there to help you figure out what safety looks like for you, and to make sure that you know what your options are. So you have full control when you're working with us.
Yeah, this is about having someone that walks with you and doesn't
Exactly.
tell you what to do. Those are two
Right.
very different things. Yeah.
Right. We want people to be safe, and no one else can tell you how to be safe. We can make suggestions, and we can do some really in-depth safety planning. If someone's thinking about leaving, we can talk with them about, what kind of documents they should be collecting, and how to maybe do some of that prep work. But none of our services are contingent upon leaving. And I think that that's kind of an old myth,
Yeah.
that's been around for centuries, quite honestly.
Yeah.
Um,
We'll
you know,
only
that,
help you if you're going to leave.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
That's not it.
And our services are not that. We have, with the individual counseling and the support group counseling, the safety planning, that's all for individuals to be able to make the decisions that they need to make to live a life that is fulfilling for them.
Right.
And I've worked with victims who never left a relationship, but needed to talk about what was going on in the relationship, wanted to find ways to be safe in that relationship. I've worked with many women who have left and gone back, and our belief is that each time a woman leaves, a victim leaves, because it's not just women, but any time a victim leaves, they're collecting information, they're gathering resources, they're garnering the strength, that inner strength that they need, to be who they want to be.
Right.
And so we're going to be there each and every time. We're going to treat them with respect, with dignity, with compassion. We're going to reaffirm that this is their life, and they get to make the choices in it.
Yeah. And I think what's really cool about that is that you are giving the victims control that they don't have in the rest of their life. And that helps to set them into a good place to be able to continue, because now they have control. You are giving them control.
Yes.
It's fantastic.
Yeah. So this is a great partnership for us with law enforcement. So, if I hope that nobody has to encounter situations like this, but we know that they do.
Yeah.
We report monthly, and there's, a couple of police departments that are actively using the lethality assessment form. And so that's an easy way for them to, again, express that concern, make the referral. We can get on the hotline with, if the officer is doing the screening, they call the hotline, and advocate does a really quick targeted safety plan to what this situation is, and then invites them, encourages them to come in for more services. Because that's the goal. It's to go back to that 96% who didn't come in for services.
Yeah.
The goal is to get folks to come in for services so that, like I said, nobody's forcing anybody, but just so they know that we're there.
Right.
And that we can offer whatever it is that they're ready to take on at that moment.
That's perfect. That's really great. Thank you, Angela, very much. And if you or you know someone who is in a situation like this, please private message us. I'll send this over to Angela to make sure that she gets it immediately.
Can I also just shout out the 24-hour hotline in case you need it?
Thank you.
717-299-1249. There's somebody answering a phone 24 hours a day.
Perfect.
And we also have the text line. So you can text the word SAFE, S-A-F-E, to 61222.
Good. Thank you very much, Angela. We will talk again next week.
All right. Thanks, Kelly. See you later.
See you, everybody.